when we broke, you had basically walked us through the means in which a grand jury that was convened to investigate reports of child sexual abuse by over 300 predator priests over the course of 70 years, involving at least 1,000 children. Because, like you told us in the last segment, there's just simply no way you can account for all of these victims, and a lot of these victims don't necessarily want to revisit this, I would imagine. And I would imagine some have died, and I want to touch on that too, because when we talk about Pennsylvania, we talk about a state that has been one of those states people talk about that has been ravaged with opioid addiction. And I wonder to what extent we see, people are living with this type of abuse in their past are susceptible to increased rates of opioid addiction. But I want to discuss that in a moment. In the meantime, one of the, in addition to over 300 priests functioning as predators of over 1,000 children, what is almost even more, I think, sort of shocking in a way, is the way the institution of the church and people very high placed in the church's hierarchy responded to this. So give us, you were about to introduce this notion of the Cardinals Playbook and what they deal with a predator. And walk us through these steps that the Cardinals took, and if we have a sense of what their state of mind was in terms of when they planned and executed this playbook.
I want to do that, and I will do that. But first, let me remind you that, yes, we're talking about the 1,000 children here in Pennsylvania. But we also know about a scandal in Louisiana in 85, in Austria in 98. In Boston, sex abuse was discovered in 2002 that went from 62 to 95, over 1,300 victims. You had the John Jay report in 2004. Ireland had a scandal of sexual abuse of children from 75 to 04 that was reported in 2009. The Netherlands in 2011 with 800 perpetrators of criminal sex abuse of children. The Dominican Republic in 2014. Australia, Chile, and of course now Pennsylvania. And they all had one thing in common, and that is this playbook that the grand jury in Pennsylvania outlined. And it really had 7 points. The first point is to be sure to never say rape, always use inappropriate contract, or he had boundary issues, or he had an alcohol problem. Number 2, don't conduct a genuine investigation with properly trained personnel. Instead, assign fellow clergy members to ask inadequate questions. Third, for the appearance of integrity, send priests for evaluation at church-run psychiatric centers. Allow the experts of the Catholic Church to diagnose whether the priest was a pedophile. Tell the parishioners, is number 4, tell the parishioners that when he's at this recovery center, he's on sick leave or serving from nervous exhaustion. Next, even if a priest is raping children, keep providing him housing and living expenses, even though he may be using these resources to facilitate more sexual assaults. Sixth, if a predator's conduct becomes known to the community, don't remove him from the priesthood to ensure no more children be victimized. Instead, transfer him to a new location where he's not known as a child abuser. And finally, and above all, in all of these places throughout these centuries, don't tell the authorities, don't tell the police. Sexual child abuse, even short of actual penetration, is, and for all relevant times, has been a crime. But don't treat it that way. Handle it like an in-house personal matter. That playbook was used for all of these victims throughout the decades since the mid-'80s, and of course, as we just common sense know, has been happening for centuries.
So what does that mean if we can cross international boundaries and cross temporal boundaries, and the identical steps are taken, the identical failures of steps, but I don't know if it's even fair to characterize it that way, because it seems like they were successful. It's just that their agenda was different. What does that tell us about who formulated this plan?
I don't think there's any question that when you see the depth and breadth and cover up, there is self-analysis going on within the Catholic Church. It says the entire membership of the cardinals of the church need to be swept out and start over because it is such an institutional, cultural, deeply embedded mechanism that fosters this disease and protects the perpetrators. And in fact, many times, as the report says, they're protected and promoted.
Well, I mean, I think for most people, it is sort of, it's just very hard to wrap our brains around this. I mean, because I want to talk to you about the potential for lawsuits here, and maybe you can address that, but also because I know that you deal with lawsuits with corporations that have done horrible things, that somehow the individuals in these corporations seem to sort of like emotionally insulate themselves in some fashion. And I wonder if there is an analogy here in some respect as to the ability for members of the church within the bureaucracy to disassociate themselves from the responses to this stuff.
All I can tell you is that I took the deposition of an archbishop, of a victim 25 years ago, and I looked into his eyes, and he doggedly defended this serial predator against the claims of a gentle child that had grown into a very large 23-year-old young man without any remorse, without any compassion. And this is a very prestigious, well-respected, elderly gentleman. And it was one of the most haunting experiences in my life when you know that this is cloaked in Christendom's all of the prestige and power and wealth of the leadership of this institution. It was scary.
Okay, we have just about a minute left. Give me a sense of from a legal perspective. My understanding is that from a criminal perspective, a lot of these things have passed the statutory statute of limitations. There's some talk that perhaps the Pennsylvania state legislature will go back and sort of revisit this. I don't know. I don't know if they have the ability to do that. You tell me. But what is the opportunity for lawsuits here?
Two things really quickly. Apparently, the cover up and plan that they had to hide it went pretty well, because out of this unbelievably broad scope tragedy, only 2 priests were subjected to criminal conduct. The cases do exist out there. I believe that there are thousands of children that have been victims that the statute has not run on yet. It just, the numbers in the science and medicine make sense to me that there are many victims out there, not just here, but in these other places around the world. So it's just a matter of the victims having the courage to come forward. I think this report will be a catalyst to embolden many of them, and I hope they do, because there is serious and meaningful legal recourse available to the victims whose statutes have not yet run.
Well, Archie Lamb from Levin Papantonio, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Really just a shocking story, and I appreciate your insight.
Truly is, Sam. Take care.